In this chapter, we are going to start working on the top dialog component. Under the components directory, let's create a new one called dialogs. And let's create a new component file called top dialog.view extension. And here again, we are going to start with the template and then the script section. From within the script, we're going to export default object literal, and we are going to leave it like this for now. Let's start with the template. Here we are going to have a div with the ID top dialog. We already have starting within the Sass files. And then we are going to apply the class to it, which will come from a computed property. And this computed property will be called wrapper class. What we are going to create then is a div with the class dialog and another class alert. And this will also have a class property. This one will be visible class. And this is a method which we'll create in just a moment. And we need to pass the argument, which is alert for this specific one. And then we are going to have a message associated with this tag. So HTML in this case, because it may contain HTML tags. Message, which will be one of the properties. And then on click, we will want to clear this dialog. And now that we have it all, let's just duplicate all this. The other one will have, rather than alert, will have a warning. So warning class, and then the argument to the visible class. Okay, now let's start with our object here. So we are going to take properties, and the only property that we will take is going to be called session dialog. And this property will be of the type object, and by default, it will return an empty object. So return and the object. Okay, that's the only property we're going to have here. Then we're going to have data properties. So data method returning the object. We are going to start with the ID, by default null. We're going to have type, by default null as well. Then we are going to have a message, which by default will be an empty string. And lastly, we're going to have a timeout property, set to null by default as well. Then we are going to have those computed properties. So computed, and we will only have two computed properties. One is visible, whether the dialog should be shown at all. And this will be based on the fact whether the message is not empty. So it's not an empty string. If there is a message, the dialog should be shown. Then we have wrapper class, which we are applying to this top dialog div. And here what we're going to return is an object with the class overlay, which will apply this tinted background to the entire window. And this will only be displayed when this is visible, when the dialog is actually visible, and it also has to be of a given type. So this type is method. We create this method in just a moment, and it needs to be confirmation, so confirm. It needs to be confirmation because all these other dialogs like say alert or warning is going to be displayed just when we save the form. Obviously we don't need to provide the tinted background for these sort of things at all. It's just when we have the confirmation with yes, no buttons. So these are our computed properties. Let's now create this type is method. So methods, and here we're going to start with type is, and we provide the type as an argument. And here what we are going to say is return this type triple equal type. So if type matches what our type property has associated with it, then that is the type we're actually passing through as an argument. Okay, what else have we got here? Let's have a look at this visible class. So method as well, visible class, and it's going to be of a type argument, and we will return an object with a class active when this is visible again, and this type is, and the type as an argument. So if the type matches, if it's an alert, add the class active to it. Otherwise, if it's warning, add the active to this one. And active will basically display the relevant div, the relevant dialog within this main top dialog section. The next method we need to create is this clear method, which we're using here on click. So let's create this one as well, clear. And the clear method will take data argument, which will be optional. So we can set it to null by default. And for the time being, we are going to leave this clear method like this. After the computed properties, we are going to add created method. So when the component has been created, what we want to do is set a few listeners, event bus listeners. So event bus dot listen, and I need to remove this import because my IDE automatically adds it. So I just remove it because it's globally registered component. So event bus listen, and we go for clear top dialog. What this one will do is call this clear method. Then we are going to have another listener, which will be top alert. So top alert, and this one will call the method alert event. We'll create this method in just a moment. Let's just add the stub for the time being. So alert event. And then we are going to have another one, top warning, which will have warning event. And again, let's add the method stub for the time being. And the last one we're going to register will be top confirm. And this one will be confirm event. Okay, so let's start with this alert event. With the alert event, the first thing we are going to do is to add the data property to it. And first of all, we are going to do clear. This clear, so we want to clear any dialog that's currently showing, if there is any. Then we are going to associate this ID with data ID. So whatever data is coming through as an argument, whatever we are sending with this event needs to contain ID. Then this type, which will be type, which this in this case is going to be alert. Then we are going to have this message, which will come from a data as well sent with the event. So data message. And then we are going to call the method called countdown. And this is because we want this dialog to disappear after a certain amount of time. So let's add this countdown method. And this countdown method, what we're going to have here is simply this timeout property, which we've added earlier. So with data properties, set timeout, and that's going to take a function which will clear the dialog. So this clear after how many seconds? Let's say 7 seconds, so 7,000 milliseconds. So that's what we want to happen once this dialog shows up, because when we associate message with this message property, this in return will return true for this is visible, which will show the dialog, and after this 7 seconds it will clear the dialog, removing the message, so the dialog will disappear. Okay, so that's our alert event method. Now what we are going to do within the warning event is very similar. So rather than copying this code, what I'm going to do is create a new method called alert, and it will take data and it will take type. And from here, I'm just going to copy everything that I just typed into this alert event. And rather than having type as a text, I'm just going to use the argument here. And from within the alert event, now what I can do is call this alert, pass data, and just a type, so alert. And now I can use the same approach for the warning event data, which needs to be passed through as an argument. And then rather than alert, it's going to be warning. The confirm event method is slightly different. We will pass the data, but we will deal with this method a little bit later on. Let's now go back to our clear method. So the first thing I want to do when I'm clearing the data is to clear the countdown to make sure that we're actually closing it when we call this method. So this clear countdown, we don't have this method yet, so let's quickly add it. So after the clear, let's add this clear countdown. What's going to happen here is, first of all, we are going to check if the timeout property actually has any value. So if this timeout triple equal null, so if it's null, then we don't have to do anything. So just return. Otherwise, what we are going to do is use clear timeout function and pass instance of this timeout. After this, the only other thing we have to do is to make sure that timeout is equal null again. Okay, so back to our clear method. Here we need to now set this type back to null and this message back to an empty string. And after this, I'm going to dispatch the event. So event bus fire this ID plus, and let's call this event cleared. And we are going to also pass data, which is sent through as an argument. And if there isn't anything, let's just pass an empty object. So anyone who's listening to this for this event, after the dialog has been cleared, they can do whatever they need to do. Okay, if we now save it all and let's add it to our components. So right at the top, I'm going to do it before our form wrapper, separate it a little bit. And what I'm going to do here is call it top dialog, and it comes from within components dialogs top dialog. So that's now registered. What we can do now is go to the views, open our template, and within the app blade, before the closing div for the ID app, what we are going to do is add the component, so top dialog. And we might remember that we have this additional property, session dialog. So let's add this session dialog here, and it's going to be an object, so it starts with a colon, session dialog. And what we are going to do here is because we're using blade, I'm going to pass the variable session dialog. And if it doesn't exist, just pass an empty object, but it needs to be a string. So let's just pass it like this. Now, to act on this session dialog, we need to add some functionality to our component. So top dialog again, after the created, we are going to add mounted method. So once the component has been mounted and DOM is available, then what we are going to do is check first if object keys, and we're going for this session dialog, and then length. If it has any length, which means there are properties, then what we want to do is set timeout and function, which will be executed after half a second, so 500 milliseconds. And what we're going to do is event bus, again, bus, and we are going to fire the event, this session dialog dot type, because this session dialog variable should contain type and the message as well, which will have ID of session, and let's concatenate it with this session dialog type, and then we are going to have message, which will be this session dialog dot message. Now let's compile all the files and see how it works actually on page load. So if we go back to the terminal, npm run dev, and once everything has compiled, let's go back to the editor. Let's open up, and we're going for the HTTP controllers, and we are on the main controller. What I'm going to do here is add the variable to the view, so with, and it's going to be session dialog. So it will correspond to this variable here. This is what it's going to contain. And what I want here is new collection, and I'm using Illuminate collection here, which will convert the array to JSON when it's been returned within the view. You can also do just JSON encode and just put the array here, but that's how I'm going to do it because these tools are at my disposal. So type will be top alert, and the message I want to display will be initial dialog loaded, for instance. Okay, if we now save it and preview it in the browser, refresh the page, and there we go, initial dialog loaded. If I click on it, it disappears, as you can see. As soon as I click on it, it goes, using this clear method. Okay, if we want to change it to the other, let's say red color, which is top warning, let's just change the type to top warning. Let's reload the page, and there we go, it's on a red background. So let's go back to the editor and remove what we've just added. We don't need this dialog on page load. Let's save and close this file. If you would like to learn more about the methods used during this video, set timeout and clear timeout can be found at developer.mozilla.org by searching for window or worker global scope mixing.